everyone. Thank you for joining us for the premiere of Get Up's new film, The Aftermath. My name is Charlie and I am the Senior Climate Justice Campaigner here at Get Up, and I'm so excited to see so many of you trickling in. Before we get into it, I want to start by acknowledging country and the traditional owners of this land. I'm calling from the lands of the beautiful Jabbergai country up in far north Queensland. The Jabbergai people here work really closely with all of the fire services, teaching Indigenous land and fire management practices. And First Nations people have been working in this way with fire for tens of thousands of years, and I really want to take this time to recognise their elders past, present and emerging. And to any First Nations folks who are joining us tonight, thank you so much for being here. I stand with you and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. If you're non-Indigenous and you know where you're calling in from, it would be great to take a moment to acknowledge the people of those lands. And if you don't know what country you're on, I welcome you to go away and find out what beautiful lands you work and live on, because this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So we have a very inspiring night ahead of us. We're going to first hear from Matt, who is a researcher at Per Capita, who you may have seen his report investigating bushfire funding that was released last month called Smokescreen. Matt's going to talk us through some of his key findings. Then we're going to watch the film together, which tells the human stories behind that research. That goes for about 35 minutes. Then we're going to have a really exciting panel discussion. We'll bring Matt back. Kim will join us, who made the film, and Jude is also going to join us, who is a community leader in Cobargo who's featuring in this film. I'll then talk to you about the broader campaign and how you can all get involved, and you should be out of here in time for dinner. So for the panel discussion, just quickly, we will be taking some questions from you guys. So if you do want to ask some questions to the panel, make sure that you're watching in YouTube on the live stream. So if you've joined us from the Get Up website, you should see below the window where my little face is, some text that says video not working, try this link. So click that to open a new window and you should be able to see the live stream, except you should see on the right hand side or at the bottom some chat as well. My colleague Anusha will be in there chatting away with you, answering any questions throughout the night, and she'll funnel through any questions that you have for the panel discussion at the end. So first up, to lay the groundwork for the documentary, Get Up members like you funded the report Smokescreen. As I mentioned, we released it last month with Per Capita, and the findings were pretty unequivocal in that the Morrison government's bushfire recovery was literally just a smokescreen with very little impact on the ground for the communities who need it most. It's a really incredible report, but no one can probably speak to it as well as Matt, the researcher. So I'm going to throw to Matt. Do you want to pop your video back on? And I'll share my screen and you can kick off.
All right, thanks, Charlie. So hello, I'm Matt Lloyd-Cape. I'm a research columnist at Per Capita, a think tank based in Melbourne. I'd like to acknowledge that we're in Jerry land. The land was never ceded, and I pay my respects as a visitor to this country. So amazingly pertinent timing for this movie to come out. With the flooding across southeast Australia, places like Clarence Valley and Kempsey are now experiencing their fourth natural disaster in 18 months, having gone through droughts, floods, bushfires, and now another flood, which is pretty unprecedented. So when Get Up first approached us to make this report, I assumed it was going to be relatively simple, that we would be approaching this as a kind of an accounting exercise, looking at government reports and spending outlays and so on, based on readily available government statistics. However, it soon transpired that that wasn't going to be the case, and we only had one government department respond to requests for information at state or federal level, despite dozens of requests being sent out. So in the end, we ended up doing more of an investigation type exercise, tracking down figures from ministerial statements and Senate estimates. So the lack of transparency really popped up for us from the very start, and that's something I'll come back to shortly. when we completed the work, it was one of those rare occasions as a researcher where you hope you're wrong, because the outcomes were so dismal. The government's efforts seem much more attuned towards making announcements rather than following through, and responsibility was certainly lacking at, in terms of getting money out fast. So let's move on to the key findings. So we estimate that around $2.7 billion was allocated to the bushfire recovery, or at least announced. And that of that, by end of December last year, around 48% of that had been spent. That's kind of spread across different pots. So it's obviously a complex recovery process across different social, economic, environmental needs and so on. But essentially, there was around half of it spent by the end of last year, which I think for most people, that is a relatively slow rate of progress to be made. Next. There were a lot of major pots of money that really concerned us, and possibly the most concerning was the disaster recovery payments, disaster recovery allowance pot. So the government announced back in, I think, February last year that they were going to provide $565 million, so after over $500 million, to helping people get back on their feet if they've been burnt out, if they'd lost property. And we found that by the end of October last year, only $238 million have been spent, which is a pretty poor showing considering this is supposed to be emergency payments to families living in tents and so on. And now that we're seeing people moving into their second winter in tents and shipping containers, you have to wonder where this money has gone and why it hasn't been spent yet. And another problem with the distribution of the funding was there appeared to be a lot of political motivation in how money was distributed. So the pie chart shows here the local economic recovery payment pot, which was another roughly $500 million pot. And as you can see, New South Wales LNP seats took 76% of all the money released so far, while Victoria has only received 6%. So there's lots going on here. The main issue for me was that, in New South Wales, LNP seats were receiving 98% of the money allocated to New South Wales, and Labor seats or other seats were receiving just 2% of the New South Wales funding. And this has been brought up by Michael West Media Group, and they tracked down a lot of this data, and we've supplemented it to the national level. So it's clearly definitely an uneven distribution, let's put it that way, if not outright rorting. And again, as I was saying earlier, the transparency around how funds are distributed, how communities are assessed and so on, it's just very hard to track down that information. So for example, the pie chart I just showed, to find out how federal government determines which states who's going to get what, there's no way of knowing that from the outside. And no one responded to our requests for those sorts of bits of information. And alongside that lack of transparency, there was a kind of a, let's say, misleading is probably as strong as I'd like to say, given how litigious members of the government are these days. But certainly the minister in charge of the bushfire recovery, David Littleproud, implied that all of the disaster relief payments have been spent by November last year, when actually we know from Senate estimates that only 42 or 43% have been spent. We also had examples where government ministers, including the Prime Minister, would announce the money, as a pot of money for economic recovery from the bushfires, and then not spend it, and then re-announce the same money again for COVID-19 relief, which is a very cynical approach to take. And we also don't know if that money's been spent in the COVID-19 relief anyway. So it could be that the money's announced twice and never spent. And then I suppose This was quite a reveal, again, from Senate estimates. So a senior public servant called Abigail Bradshaw answered the question in Senate estimates as to how much money had been allocated to them. And she said, oh, the $2 billion fund is just a notional fund. So we don't actually know if this money has actually been earmarked and designated to bushfire recovery, or if it's a floating number that the government will determine as we go. Incidentally, Abigail Bradshaw is now no longer in that role at the NBRA. She's been moved on. Yeah. So that's kind of the key findings. We found that government has been difficult to get hold of, and their responses have been fairly defensive and dismissive so far. So when Get Up members have written to their MPs to say, what about this report? They've just dismissed it out of hand, or tried to suggest that we don't know how to do research, which is very interesting because even in some of the government responses, we were getting new information that had never been released before. So so that's kind of the report in a nutshell.
Unsurprising, but very shocking nonetheless. Thanks, Matt. And a reminder to everyone watching that there'll be some time at the end to ask Matt some questions. So if you have any, pop into the live stream chat and ask some questions there, and we'll get to them at the end. So that kind of lays the foundation, gives us the facts about what support has been given and who it is and isn't reaching. But we know that this is about much more than numbers, and that there are people behind this data. And that's what the documentary is about. It's about the bushfires, it's about climate change, it's about climate recovery, it's about an absent government, but most importantly, it's about really inspiring community resilience and leadership. And we've seen yet another disaster wreak havoc in many of the same communities this past week, which has been a very difficult reminder of how urgent this work is. Many of the people who are featured in the film are tuning in with us right now. So hello to all of you, and thank you for sharing your stories with us. And I also want to quickly thank all of the Get Up members watching this film, and the report that Matt just spoke to was funded by over 3,000 of you who chipped in big and small to make it happen. So thank you so much, as always. There is a content warning on this film. There are some references to mental health and suicide. There'll be some numbers on the screen if you need any assistance as you're watching. But use the chat as much as you can to give messages of support to the survivors of climate disasters, and any questions that you have can go in there as well. So without further ado, this is the aftermath, and I hope you enjoy it.
My property burnt.
We couldn't rely on any organisation, any system, government, anybody to help out.
If we didn't do it, who was going to? I'm here. I'm not getting paid. Your government officials are paid to do this work. Tell me why I'm still doing it.
I asked for help, a tent. I was given, in the middle of winter, a little summer tent. I couldn't even get a blanket, a pillow.
When we had storms and, stuff's getting blown around and ripped apart and sort of soaked by the rain, it makes you very aware of your vulnerabilities as a human and how important shelter is.
We thought it may have slowed down a little bit since the bushfire, but in actual fact, the help is actually required more now than before.
Climate justice recognises that the people most affected by climate change are the ones that have had least to do with producing the problem.
I'm excited to stand up for what I think is right.
It's hard, but it's worth it. These people are worth it.
The media, the day the house burnt down, all the piranhas came out, and they were saying, "How do you feel? How do you feel?"
And then the next thing is, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss."
Oh, I hate that saying.
The guy down at the news agency, he said, "That's a real bugger."
Yeah. And someone we met down at Balmoral Village, and they said, "Did you lose everything?" And we said, "Yes." "Oh, shit, that's a bugger." The Colorbond shed directly behind us is where we live, and we'll be living in that until July this year. Come on in. I put some lights on, I think. Are we in here? Here we go. 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 Because we couldn't rely on any organisation, any system, government, anybody to help out. So we decided to take control. We bought the kitchen for $99 on eBay. And then in here, we've got our just a shower system that we set up, and that sets us up in almost like a one-bedroom apartment. When we moved in, we didn't have any windows because the cost of the shed didn't include windows. So we lived for 9 months with not a window, lived in the pitch black. We had one light in the shed. Introducing our windows from Anglicare, which finally shed some light in our life and some fresh air. We've put in a slow combustion stove to keep us warm because we froze last winter. We call it the home shed. By the time we move into the house, we will have been living in this shed for 14, 15 months.
The next one's going to be a family box. Family, 4 children, so we need the works. Double up on the spaghetti, baked beans, and noodles, please. Gosh, it's hot. We tend to try and put in things like Vicky's veggies, because if they've been bushfire affected, most of them can't grow in the ground yet, and because we're an hour to 2 hours from any supermarket, it's very hard to get or keep any fresh vegetables because they now don't have a roof over their head, and very few of them have got fridges. You're going well there, Rod. I was the RSL secretary here for Can River, and when I returned from being evacuated, I was approached by a couple of the older people saying they were desperate for food, that they felt forgotten. For the first 2 days of the week, we pull everything together, and then they either collect or we do the deliveries at the end of the week or weekends. I hate missing people out. Now this one's for a gentleman, Cassie.
Yep.
On his own, an elderly gentleman. I'm not a registered charity. I don't get funding. All our food in the container has been donated because without it, we can't keep going. And with the help of my trusty volunteers, we get it together. None of us rich. all disabled, diabetic with no toes on his feet, a cancer sufferer, and of course I'm disabled myself.
And I'm just here to keep an eye on all.
Oh, she keeps us in line. Cass, can you see if there's any toddler nappies with this lot, please?
I can grab some of that.
So yeah, it's hard, but it's worth it. These people are worth it. Can I just get in there, please, Rod? It's been going for 12 months, and I think it's going to go for a lot longer.
There were instances of Aboriginal people showing up at evacuation centres and relief workers being pretty explicitly racist. The needs of Aboriginal people are not indifferent to those of non-Indigenous community members, but there are added needs that are deeply complex, that are historically complicated. More than 96,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were directly affected by the Black Summer bushfires. 96,000 Aboriginal people represents 12% of the entire Indigenous population of Australia. A lot of people who live in these regional townships, and the ones in particular affected by the Black Summer bushfires, they do have connections to the country, a lot of to the land and to the townships and to the community. But then you look at the needs of Aboriginal people in those places, and specifically traditional owners. Like, these are people with deep, ancient and spiritual attachments to these landscapes. And not just landscapes, but like particular parts of the landscape as well, particular plants, particular animals, particular landscape features like mountains and rivers, waterholes, those kind of things. These are the things that were, destroyed largely in the bushfires and will take generations to recover, if they ever recover to that state again.
My property burnt, and I didn't want to go back to the property. I just couldn't do it this summer. I was afraid, actually, so I decided to come here and volunteer here.
The good news, we updated the stats yesterday. We've ticked over to 80,000 hours, which is amazing effort on this camp. We've put in 80,000 hours of volunteering in the local community.
I saw this town on the news so much, it broke my heart, and I thought, this is where I need to come.
So we've finished 126 properties. Still so many more to do though. But let's focus on the good. That's what we've achieved.
My work here, my typical day is I'm the cook. There are 4 days I get up at 5 in the morning. I don't leave the kitchen until everything's done at 9:30 at night. I was the only cook until yesterday when I got someone to help me. That was very hard. I didn't think I could do it. But I thought, no, challenge. I've been through enough. I can do this. And I can, actually. I never cooked vegetarian in my life. I'm pretty good at it, actually. Blaze Aid actually saved my sanity because I was just getting angry, lost. I did think about suicide. And then I went over to Blaze Aid and I said, can I come and volunteer here? When you're a part of, even if you're cooking, it's an honour to do this.
Dinner is early tonight at 6 because Julie's trying to get a winning Blaze Aid trivia team together. So if you're up for that, see Julie.
Blaze Aid is not just volunteers helping people fence. It gives a chance for someone like me to breathe. Breathe. Yeah.
The fires was, it was an event, but it's an ongoing thing. Like, it didn't just happen and we were able to walk away from it. Like, the trauma that goes to that, like the psychologists that came down, they were saying like we would see impacts in the next coming year and the 2 years after. So it's like,
but they were only here for 2 months.
Yeah, but like that was the psychologist predictions and stuff. And yeah, I feel like kind of people forget that they're still impacting people still, yeah.
Okay, we're going out to one of our little hamlets or rural communities called Club Terrace. They were quite heavily decimated in the fire, well over, I'd say 60% of that little hamlet, and all the houses on the outskirts surrounding that area were absolutely burnt to the ground. So we're going to do just a few deliveries and just check on them, see how they're going. All down that side there was all houses, and every one of those houses are gone. There's only 2 houses remaining on School Road, but there were 6. The few houses that remain were very, 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 very lucky. We thought it may have slowed down a little bit since the bushfire, but in actual fact, the depression and the help is actually required more now than before. They were in shock before, they were numb before, and it was just putting one foot in the front of the other. Now the reality's hit home, that they haven't got a home. They're almost penniless, a lot of the people we look after, surviving on incomes now that have been either halved or quartered. So as one elderly couple said to me last week, if I didn't give them food, they wouldn't have had anything to eat for the next 2 weeks. The general consensus is they were forgotten, and I have to say they were.
This is Felix. I've had him for about 1.5 years, so they've been through the fires with me. And now I can't We're separated from them now. Not at all. They still have respiratory problems from the smoke. His tongue's always out. He'll sit at the window and just poke his tongue out at everybody. I have him famous on TikTok. We've got number 5 here. And he died, and I watched him die, so resuscitated him. And he's still alive, aren't you? There was just nowhere to put them out of the smoke. I had nowhere out of the smoke.
I asked for help, a tent. I was given, in the middle of winter, a little summer tent. I couldn't even get a blanket, a pillow. I met the farmers that would come when I first got here, and they would talk to me and tears in their eyes, and I started crying with them because I was the only volunteer that knew and felt what they felt.
There's a lot of people still living in caravans and under tarps and things along that road. There's little encampments all over. Wherever you see a container and a couple of caravans, that's probably where someone lost their house. At the moment, we're only doing boundary fences.
So long the highway is secured, you know, that's most important for me.
So this is where
the house was,
and that's where it will be?
Will be again, yeah.
Yeah.
I came to Australia with a suitcase and left with the suitcase.
Yeah.
To Bermagui and the Narooma, you know. The flames, everything, the embers, it was just scary. I said always, we will be back tomorrow. 3 days later, on the house. Yeah, 1 year passed, yeah.
Yeah, 1 year.
Yeah.
Where did that go?
But you can say everybody was suffering here in the area, you know. There's across the road on the hill there, Jim, he lives in a caravan, is cooking outside. Here behind me, Barry, he probably builds a shed up and lives in a shed.
We don't tend to get on each other's nerves because we've been together since we were 17, so we really become one organism and just exist together in here.
It's been a blessing to get all the rain, but with all the rain you get all the growth that you're forever fighting.
You bleed money and you can't help it. You try to stop money from going out the door, but you bleed money. You start to bleed money when the property burns down and you have no electricity and you have no water, and you have to have that connected.
But we got the electricity back on here through one of the Red Cross grants, and it cost us $6,500.
Yes. You think, you get a $5,000 grant and it costs you $6,500. So that's what I meant about bleeding money. If you've got savings, you will watch it disappear. If you have insurance money, you will watch it be spent in ways that you don't want it spent.
You hear so much about, the government's doing this, and you say, well, I've never heard about that, and whatever. And there is no one you can go to. You have to try and weasel out all this information from all these different sources. If you're in a situation like we are, and you are not, your mental health is not all that great, you just give up.
Yes.
You just give up.
Yeah. If it wasn't for the charities, we would be in a well of despair. If it was just the government, we'd be homeless, hungry, angry, and suicidal.
No. Outside. Dogs and ducks don't go together. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, I dare not complain because I had a house and I was boiling a kettle in my own kitchen, and so many people in Mallacoota weren't. So I felt really shy about talking about anything to do with it, and I still do. At the Bushfire concert on Saturday night, I was super conscious of the people there who I saw, who I knew had lost houses. I met people who I didn't know whether they'd lost their house or not, and they had. People's jobs have gone as well, and a lot of the people down here are in tourism, so those jobs just disappeared.
Climate justice recognises that the people most affected by climate change are the ones that have had least to do with the problem, with producing the problem. And Aboriginal people are very much in that category. The way that non-Indigenous people have been managing the environment does not work. It has not worked. It has been a catastrophic failure.
We did, didn't we? We knew 100% when the fire hit us on 3 fronts. 3. 1, 2, 3 fronts. We knew it was climate change. When you grow your own food and you have your own farm animals, you see it. You see when your dams aren't filling up.
Those hills out there in the Wad Villager National Park must have been incredible heat in there. It's just showing those signs of regenerating. It just must have been incredibly hot.
It's hard to see that vegetation ever coming back, I reckon.
Those hills are just still as bare as that road.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
We had mature gum trees just dying and dropping their branches, and it was so tinderbox, and it was like everyone knows what it's like throwing kindling into a fire to start it. Everything was like that.
From the heat, my granddaughter swing, it's just buckled up, and this one is just
melted.
The baby seat is just shrunk.
A lot of farmers are just saying, that's it, I'm selling, I'm going. And I go, but where are you going to go? It feels like nowhere's safe anymore. Everyone saw that nowhere was safe, really. Not being on the beach, the ocean, nowhere was safe. So I don't know where to go from there.
Right up till the last couple of weeks before the Christmas party, we were still getting names from people we knew were there, but they didn't ask because of pride. 8 months, 8 or 9 months later, they still wouldn't ask because they didn't want to, too embarrassed. One had, four kids?
4
or 5?
children.
Yeah.
So, we found them beds. But as soon as we put the word out, look, we've got a family now that needs, beds. They're sleeping on the floor at neighbours. You found it? There should be 1 or 2. Just sit it down there. Right. Oh. And the plastic bag with the chips and stuff in for the kids. Oh, God, that leg. I'm on crutches, Jode.
Right. So it'll be delivered in the next fortnight or more.
Right.
Or within the next month. And we've got no slab to even put it on. I was going to just do it ourselves.
Yep.
By hand.
Yep.
Bought a brand new cement mixer, so.
That's what a lot of everyone else has said to me too. They're getting offers of furniture, but they've got no home to put it in. Anyway, there's a couple of goodies there to keep you going for the time being.
You're a legend.
All right, see you, darling. I better get moving.
You've got to get back to that container at 12 o'clock.
I know. Right, well, I better get my backside into gear and go and make a few more.
Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome, honey.
Drive safely.
I will, and I'll see you soon.
Well, if you ever need to talk, you know where we are.
Oh, crikey.
You know our numbers.
See you, Jode. See you, Mum. If I've got someone that's further out in the bush and they need stuff, we drop the stuff there on the veranda of the school for them, and then they'll come in out of the bush a little later on or whenever they can make their way through from their property or farm, and they'll collect the stuff there. So we've left one lot there for a lady with a handicapped son. Well, this is where Stewie's place was.
Yeah.
And this is what he's doing all himself.
Yeah, I've got a few people helping, so
yeah.
can't complain.
No.
Yeah.
Stewie's got 2 daughters.
Yeah.
That'll be nice for them to be able to come back to a house.
Oh, totally.
Well, this is really different because the last time we come out here, there was none.
Right?
This is none of this.
Yeah.
Absolutely none of this, as you know.
Yeah.
So you're doing a good job, my friend. And how are you going yourself? All good?
Yeah, pretty good.
Hanging in there?
Yeah.
Let me know if you need anything.
Well, what's in here?
Just your little surprises.
Oh, fantastic, thank you.
As well. Just a few little things to top you up again. I've got to open up the container at 12, so I'd love to stay and chat a bit longer, but I've got to go, Dale. You take it easy.
Thank you.
All right, love. You take care.
This is the bit I think people love, is the rebuilding. lot of working side by side with farmers, and it's just great to see the boost a farmer or a property owner gets when a team arrives to help them out. I think it gives them a little bit of hope.
This particular crew here at the moment are very, very good. It's obviously new stuff to them. And the team leader is a bit of a perfectionist, and the other two are just really good workers. So I'm basically going on clearing the line and putting the strainer posts in, and they're putting the fence up and putting a nice fence up.
Yeah. I've never really had much money to donate, but now I've got time, so I figure this way you're going right to the source where it's needed, and actually I know that it's directly helping people, community, locals. Blaze Aid, although we're not professional fencers, we like to do a professional job. Everyone's pretty proud of their work.
People learn to rely just on each other.
I don't even know if it's an actual recipe. It's just something I used to do for my kids that I now do for anyone else.
No one will sit there going, oh, not the same thing. We had this the other day or the day before. They'll never get the same meal twice. Not even if I tried to cook it. It won't happen. I try to make every meal different. Every salad is different every day. There's no two salads the same.
Radish sprouts, never heard of them. And what was the other sprouts? Pea sprouts? Pea sprouts. I've never heard of them myself again either. They're apparently very nice from what our vegetarians say. 6 o'clock dinner is tonight because we're all going out. We don't go out as a group for anything. So I've talked to our coordinator about going to the local trivia night. We get to know each other a lot better because some of us are going to be here till end of March, April even, for the pack-up.
Oh, you're never going to get the phone down to the pub.
That's hummus, and I don't know exactly what hummus... To be honest, I don't know what hummus is.
Potatoes.
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 Are they vegan?
Oh, that smells nice.
Eat fast. We got to be down there. It starts at 7. We have a table booked.
I don't feel like eating after I cook, but I will later tonight when I come home. I like eating with my animals, but I do enjoy watching everybody eat.
Oh, Julie, what did you do with Alice and Lauren?
They're just sitting on the table, one vegetarian, one meat.
Thank you.
Blaze Aid rules, come on.
It's going to rain tonight, I think.
Yeah, what time are we going to go shopping tomorrow?
I have a council appointment tomorrow. I see a councillor once a week, starting last week for bushfire affected people.
Now, everyone who's playing is present, happy, content, got paper. Right. These guys are going to be coming from now on. They're just new. They're the Blaze Aid mob, so we love them.
I just like to hide my mouth.
Yep, just one, yep. Number 1 is either Othello or Reversi. Reversa. Reversi. And 10 is Hungry Hungry Hippos.
I know that one. Hungry Hungry Hippos.
That's Simon Says.
All these disasters just made us more determined to take control of our life. We've lived sustainably for 50 years. First thing, rebuild the veggie patch. Strip it out, rebuild it, fix up the soil that had been burnt and charred and ashed, replenish it, add manure to it and so on, replant everything. The ash. Oh, ash. Yeah. And so we've been dining out on snow peas and cabbages and broccoli and cauliflower and swedes and passion fruits and, yeah.
It also helps you get over the loss. You have got a project to do, and the project is building a new life.
So in community recovery literature for non-Indigenous people, we know that things like communities that have a shared understanding of history, communities with close social bonds are actually better placed to recover effectively from major disasters such as bushfires. Aboriginal communities have all of them and more.
So we're trying to get as many plants in as we can, learn about how to harvest them and look after the plant as well, because they're all perennial. At the moment, we're just collecting seed off them. And that's the beauty of these plants, that they're always going to be here. We'll always eat food from them. What a poor little thing. Would you like a strawberry? This is a way of farming where you reduce your impacts on the earth and still get food.
During the Black Summer bushfires, our own organisations, Aboriginal community organisations, went above and beyond to support their own community. You know, these are inspiring stories. They demonstrate very clearly that Aboriginal people, far from being vulnerable, were agents of strength and filled the gaps themselves. They didn't wait for other people.
If we didn't do it, who was going to?
I'm here. I'm not getting paid. Your government officials are paid to do this work. Tell me why I'm still doing it. I can't say anymore. I get so down. It's hard to live with. Very hard. And if I'm feeling it, imagine what they are. I can't say anymore.
Next time, you never know. The environment all around the world is just changing, you know. And we don't do enough here in Australia.
Yeah.
And we got the arrogance, you can say, an arrogant government,
Yeah.
you know.
Directly after the 2020 fires, there were dozens of Blaze Aid camps stretching from Queensland right down to Kangaroo Island and over to South Australia. The work was done and maybe volunteer numbers dried up and coordinators burnt out. Camps closed, so that over the Christmas period we were one of only 3 Blaze Aid camps still running. But as of just a couple of days ago, when 11,000 hectares of farming land in South Australia was burnt, we've now got a new need. So I think there's plans for at least a couple of camps down there.
In WA, windy conditions have hampered firefighters' efforts overnight as they struggle to battle an out-of-control blaze in the Perth Hills that's already destroyed more than 70 properties.
I feel for them. I am so sorry, and I certainly hope that they get the support that they need. And believe me, they will need that support.
And in an era of climate change, these disasters will only become more frequent, and it's hard to imagine them becoming more severe, but it's foolish to say that they can't be more severe.
We may have had a financial crisis in the world and it affected millions of people. We may have had COVID. We've had COVID that's affected millions of people. Climate change is going to affect everyone.
I feel like everyone is going to be impacted by climate change. And we're just one town that has experienced it dramatically in a short period of time, but like it comes down to it, it's going to affect everyone. And I feel like, yeah, connection to where you come from, or like the place where you get resources that help you survive, like food and water. Like, I feel like you should be passionate about that survival.
It's just ridiculous that our government doesn't acknowledge climate change and the impact. Humans are contributing now. That's the only thing we can change. So why aren't we changing it?
When we have options that we could take.
Yeah.
Or ways we could change.
Obvious ones.
Yeah.
As well.
And yet we don't. And I can also have conversations with people and do interviews like this, which raise awareness, and collectively we can start to take action. I'm excited to stand up for what I think is right.
Climate change is an opportunity to recalibrate the relationship. It's a kind of opportunity Indigenous peoples all around the world have been denied for hundreds of years. Managing the land is one thing. Allowing oneself to to learn about relationship with country, about relationship to the land, to the water, what it is to be a responsible citizen, what it is to contribute to your local community. To me, they're the real lessons that Aboriginal knowledges can teach us, can teach non-Indigenous Australians. What it means to belong in a place, what it means to call a place home.
Stop coal mining. It's like taking the blood from the veins of a human being. You're taking it from the planet. You can't keep draining the planet. Nature seems to fight back, and I don't think we really want to see what's going to happen when she gets really angry.
That book is over 30 years old, that Kompenya book, and it's got a whole chapter on climate change and what are we doing about it 30 years ago. I wouldn't mind a couple of copies of it.
Yeah, Jude's a radical.
Last night in the trivia, I don't know how, but we came second. The hands are all up for next Tuesday, so that will be a regular thing. Now we have something to talk about besides work or fires. Now we have something to look forward to.
And wow, I don't know how many times I've watched that now, but every time it hits me just as hard. So many incredible stories, and so many people still struggling through that right now as well. But now we're lucky to be joined again by Matt. Jude is here as well, who is a volunteer coordinator at Blaze Aid in Cobargo, and Kim will be joining us in a second as well. Remember that if you have questions, to pop them in the chat, and we will get to them when we can. But Jude, I might start with you. Firstly, on behalf of everyone on the call, I'm sure, thank you so much for sharing your story and for all of the work that Blaze Aid does. How is Blaze Aid going now, and what's next for you? I know you've probably got some camps set up with the floods that are happening at the moment. You're on mute.
Blaze Aid Cobargo is still going strong. We've got a steady flow of volunteers coming through. Blaze Aid nationally is busier and busier. We've still got a couple of bushfire recovery camps set up, and on the East Coast, South Australia and the West Coast, and as of a couple of weeks ago after the floods, we're setting up new camps all up the East Coast. So Blaze Aid is busier than ever.
Yeah, I can imagine. I remember saying to you the other day that we'll know our work is done when we don't have any work left to do, when the fires aren't burning and the floods aren't flowing and everything like that. Kim, how about you? You obviously spent months on the ground with Jude and Julie and Sherielle and all the other people in the film. From your experience in making the documentary, what did you find most inspiring about these communities and these people?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Definitely, it's just the astonishing resilience that so many of these individuals and communities have, because the need, and this is obviously before the floods and things, so the need when I was visiting communities and talking to people was really pretty full on. Like a year later, there were still so many people who were homeless, basically, and really struggling, lots of mental health issues, and really did seem basically forgotten and ignored by government. But within the communities and within the individuals themselves, it was just, yeah, basically solutions were coming from all over the place. So obviously I was very lucky to find the people that I found for the film, because they sort of capture that. And that's just, yeah, incredibly inspiring. There were actually a lot of amazing people and amazing community solutions, which aren't in the film because then it'd be too long. It's already a half-hour film. So yeah, that was the most inspiring. Yeah, that people, I guess all over the country would, I mean, like the volunteers at the Blaze Aid camp donating their time, and then the people who were supporting Sheriel in Can River with donating all the food. And so that was still coming, you know, a year afterwards. Yeah, I guess those things.
Yeah, and I think that just looking at the chat on the live stream as well, a lot of people can't believe that this is a year on and that the government still doesn't have a cohesive response around this, and that almost coming on to 18 months later, people are still having to deliver donated goods and things like that, which is pretty unacceptable. Matt, you mentioned earlier that some of the response that you've had to the report. Do you want to tell us a bit more about how any particular politicians received it or didn't respond to it?
Well, we didn't get any federal response, like directly to our requests for information. I think you sent through some emails that GetUp members have been getting from their MPs, and even their MPs were saying there's no problem with transparency, but even they were getting the figures different from the MBRA website. So there's clearly even a breakdown in communication from an MP to the MBRA, which is just insane. Yeah, particularly when we're already on to the next crisis and they're trying to smooth their way out of this one without having spent a good chunk of the money. It just seems like, yeah, I think for the federal government, there's a kind of feeling like, well, we've allocated the money, so that's job done. And we've constantly talked about the need for more on the ground government workers to proactively go out and help people. Like if you've lost your phone, if you've lost your access to information, you need someone going forward and communicating directly with you. And I think that's what these stories sort of explored, was like trying to navigate this rabbit warren of government agencies whilst maybe suffering PTSD without a phone and without a house. You know, it's not acceptable in a first world country in 2021, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned earlier, a lot of these communities have faced 4 massive life-changing events in the last 12 to 18 months with very little government support to get through that. And Jude, given that you've been working in these communities since that time, what do you see as the need on the ground right now, over a year later?
Very complex and extraordinary need. I mean, from our point of view, there's a lot of, after a year, there's so much regrowth. From a Blaze Aid point of view, it's hard to be rebuilding fences because there's so much regrowth to get through. Straight after the fires, you know, the ground was bare. Removing and then rebuilding fences was, I mean, it was hard, dirty work, but it was possible. So there's a need for a lot of plant and machinery to do that, which just isn't around at the moment. And in the community, there's a need for people to be in their homes, and there's people have been dealing with this for over a year. They're facing their second winter in sheds or tents or caravans, and they're exhausted from dealing with it. And yeah, I think housing is probably the greatest need in the community.
Yeah. Do you have any advice? A question that's come in on the chat is from Natalie. Do you have any advice on for communities who have recently hit by floods? And earlier in the year we had fires as well, as you mentioned in the film. Do you have any advice for those communities and for any communities in the future that might be hit by these climate disasters in how to stay resilient and strong during these times?
Oh, that's a big question. I guess all of the communities shown in the film have shown that pulling together, connecting, and unfortunately there is a big reliance on volunteers in taking up the slack from levels of government. But I think pulling together, coming together as a community, just on Saturday, we had the first really big community event in Cobargo since the fires, and then since COVID had everyone going their separate ways. And we had a Fire Up Oz event, which was a great celebration of community, put on by volunteers once again with a little bit of funding, and just a great day of music and fun and community. And I think that's going to be the answer, as well as relying on agencies and people like Blaze Aid. I mean, Blaze Aid will always be there to help after a disaster.
Yeah, yeah. And you touched on this earlier, but how important has volunteer work been in the recovery? There's a few people in the chat saying that clearly volunteers are picking up the slack where governments aren't helping. How important has that been, and do you think that's sustainable long term, having been a volunteer in that position yourself for over a year now?
I think it has to be sustainable, because I mean that's what we do. We pull together to support each other. The volunteer effort, I mean, Cobargo's recovery is, even aside from Blaze Aid, is run a lot by volunteers. The local bushfire relief centre in Cobargo and in Corma, which is a little town that was also severely affected, just 10 minutes away from here. It's run totally by volunteers, and it has been for 14 months now. Even our volunteer organisation has been supported by other volunteers in the community, so we get an endless supply of cakes and meals provided to us by community groups, individual people. There's barely a day goes by when someone from one of the local CWA groups doesn't bring up trays of cakes for us.
That's so lovely. I can see Kim smiling. He must have experienced that when you've been filming. Is that right, Kim?
He had a few of the cakes while he was here, yeah.
I wanted to leave them for the fences, but then people would insist, no, have a muffin. So
and Kim, what were some of the challenges of doing this film, and what did you find the most difficult?
I guess the really obvious thing was at the start, just because I had like a massive list of phone numbers. So I was basically cold calling people or cold emailing people to ask them to share their story. And I did speak to a lot of people, and it was just, just really sad, because there were just so many people, and obviously I spoke to a tiny fraction of the people affected, but it still felt very overwhelming. And everyone's personal story, whether they'd lost their house or had damage to the property, or just had been had to evacuate from the fires and deal with things, and each of those stories could have made a film. It just obviously we had to be selective. So it was, I guess, just trying to talk to so many people, and I guess try to be supportive. It's tricky to ask someone to share their story, but to try to avoid re-traumatizing them by having to repeat the story all the time. So that was tricky. And it was really, I guess a lot of the people I spoke to, I would kind of describe them as tough country people, farmers, or people living on the land who deal with a lot of hardship and deal with things in a very self-sufficient way. But they were, so many of them, I think all of them, experiencing really heavy kind of mental health pressures. And so people who I do think are really tough would still break down in tears, nearly everybody. And so that's, I guess the challenge was to try to do justice to the to these people and try to make a film which hopefully will reach a wide audience. And so people that don't know what's going on, I mean, obviously I didn't know what was going on in these different communities until I made the film. So I do hope that this film reaches, across Australia so people can see what's going on and, get involved in the action like what GetUp is doing to try to address some of these issues.
Yeah. We're seeing there's Olaf Aseo, sorry if I've mispronounced your name, saying in the chat, does this mean that residents have applied for funding and not gotten that assistance? And we heard from Judith and Paul in the film who said that even when they were eligible for certain funding, it wasn't enough to meet the costs of the recovery and what the rebuild actually was. So they were constantly, Judith says she's constantly bleeding money. Matt, can you speak to that and to the processes that you kind of got a sense of through doing the research and what you know of the Royal Commission and how they found the processes for people trying to get support?
Yeah, I think the Royal Commission described the process as traumatising. So I think that was the word they used for people trying to access funding. A lot of people constantly getting a new case manager every time that they apply for funding. So I was speaking to a woman from Central New South Wales who's saying that every time she contacts the department to get an update on where her application is, she has to re-explain her process again, her story again. And as Kim was saying, like, it's traumatizing to have to re-tell your story to a new caseworker every time. There's an irony here, which is that the government is letting the taps loose where it suits them. So for this economic recovery funding, New South Wales had $176 million go out the door without any application forms whatsoever. And that was all done on a wink and a nod between the New South Wales government and New South Wales MPs that they had an interest in supporting. And that's obviously John Barilaro is in a bit of hot water about that now. Maybe that will lead to some better processes being implemented. But yeah, without any transparency over criteria on those big pots of money, it's not surprising that you'd see at the household level people unable to navigate these bureaucratic channels. And yeah, there's just a lack of federal workers. There's no federal workers going out into the communities to do assessments and to actively, proactively offer support in accessing different pots of money. So yeah, in the latter part of our report, we put in a bunch of recommendations, and a lot of them relate to transparency over how to access money and making sure it's based on community need rather than anything else.
Did you know much about what happened with immediate financial assistance that was talked about a lot in the wake of the bushfires and things like emergency accommodation and emergency catering and things? Did you get a sense of that?
Only in the sense that we only saw that they promised $566 million in January, February, and by the end of October, they'd only spent 40% of that. So clearly that emergency funding wasn't going out the door quickly enough. And because we can't get any access to communications with people in the department, like, we don't know why there's a hold up there and we don't know what the problem is. So this transparency issue again means that it's not only that they're being defensive and hiding what's going on, it means that we're not prepared for next time, and we're already at next time, people are flooded out now and we don't know what the problems are in terms of getting emergency funding out. So yeah, the secretiveness is a big issue.
Yeah, definitely. And it's mentioned in the report as well that there's another bunch of research that looks into how much these disasters are actually costing every year, and there are some big numbers out there, like $100 billion of disaster and recovery funding that's needed. And so when you look at the 2.7 billion that was actually offered up and that less than half of that's been spent, it's no wonder that we're seeing these people still living in such difficult conditions.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That was Ross Gittins, who is one of the leading economists in the country, and he's saying that we're probably looking at north of $100 billion in terms of damage. and to not, to say, well, 2.7 is enough to fix the problem is, not acceptable, and B, to not spend that money is just outrageous. So, I mean, this was, for me, doing the research was just an exercise in frustration. I didn't get to meet the volunteers and the community members who have a different side to the story, which is, beautiful and humane, and you want politicians to be seeing this stuff so that they can actually change their actions.
Yeah. And we know that these events are unfortunately going to continue to happen at a greater frequency and severity as long as we continue to dig and burn fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas. And we know this, like Jaya Ruby says in the film, we know that the solutions are out there. We know what they are. We know they're affordable. We know they create jobs. There's obviously some kind of blocker happening in government that's stopping that from happening. And just on what you were touching on before, Matt, Claire in the chat says that often when people go to rebuild, there are new standards from when they first built and new ratings that they have to meet, which makes it more time consuming and more expensive. And when I was chatting to Judith and Paul last week, this is exactly their experience. They built their home sustainably decades ago, and trying to build it back from the ground up has been a minefield of obstacles for them, and much more expensive than it was when they built it originally. And that is not a unique experience either. There seem to, I think I've answered most of the questions that we have popping up in the chat, but keep them coming on our email and everything if anything else has come up for you tonight. But I just wanted to talk quickly about, which follows on a little bit from what we've been saying around how much these disasters cost and what the struggle is in communities trying to rebuild after them. And we know that there is a lot of resilience in the ground up from people like Judith and Paul and Sheriel and Jude and Julie at BlazeAid, and that there should be so much more support from government. And we're seeing that this week with the floods hitting a lot of the same communities. And we know that these events are going to keep happening. And we know who's responsible, and it's not the people in this film, that is for sure. We know that coal, oil and gas mining companies are the biggest contributors to climate change, and they really should be paying the damage because they're the ones that have caused it in the first place. So that's what this is all kicking off, is our new campaign for a National Climate Compensation Fund, which does exactly that. I'm just going to share my screen where you can see a link to sign up to. It's for people who might not be able to see it. It's getup.org.au/aftermath-sign. So head to that link and you can sign it right now. It'll only take a few seconds. And it's really important because we know that as well as a commitment to phasing out fossil fuels, Australia needs a climate compensation fund paid for by the coal, oil and gas industry, so they can finally pick up the tab for the damage that they've caused. And that money could help not just in the recovery, which we've seen is really, really needed, but in working with communities and helping them rebuild from the ground up and doing things like off-grid renewables and things like that, which would just help prepare these communities so much more. I'm just going to try and share my screen again because I don't think that worked. How is it looking now? Can people see? Nope. Might get Noosh then to pop the link in the chat and we'll share it around later as well. Sorry about that. But I'll read out the link again. It's getup.org.au/aftermath-sign, SIGN. So head to that link. It'll only take a few seconds and it'd really mean a lot to everyone in the film and who are still trying to get back on their feet after these disasters. If you could stand in solidarity with them and sign the petition. And even better if you could get more people on board and more people hearing these stories. So if you could share it with 2 or 3 people that might not be on the call tonight, share the documentary with them, ask them to sign the petition, that would be really, really incredible. Because we know that it shouldn't be these folks who are in the film, First Nations communities, Judith, Paul, Julie, paying for these events. It should be, the bill should go to those on the fossil fuel executives, essentially. So thank you to everyone who joined tonight, everyone who's just signed the petition and who's about to share it with a friend. Thank you to our panel, Kim, the filmmaker, Jude, the volunteer coordinator out at Cobargo, and Matt, the researcher of the smokescreen report. And thank you to everyone on the call who makes this work possible. This report and the film was funded by GET members like you. You make this movement what it is. You are the movement. So thank you so much. The film will be live on Facebook and YouTube tomorrow morning, so you can share it far and wide. But yeah, that's it. Enjoy the rest of your night, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie.
The sky turns dark, and it's blazing apart. You're in the glow of the heart, but we just sit on our thumbs until there's nothing but dust. Branches breaking like bones, floating embers from cyclones. I said I'd never leave you alone.